To our webinar tonight. My name's Lauren Richardson and I'm Director of Studies and Lecturer at the Asia Pacific College of Diplomacy at the Australian National University. Tonight's webinar, South Korea's Transition to a Post-Pandemic World, is presented to you by the Korea Institute at ANU, which is directed by Professor Ruth Barraclough. This is obviously a very important topic because I think everyone has been impacted by this pandemic in some kind of way, and it's dominating the news throughout the world. So therefore it made a lot of sense that we focus on this topic for our first seminar in the Korea Institute series. So obviously South Korea was one of the first countries to make international headlines about the coronavirus because it had one of the earliest spikes. Its first reported case was on January 20, and that was also the same day that the United States had its first reported case. And very quickly, within about a month, that first case turned into quite a huge spike and really emerged as a major outbreak in South Korea, one of the first big outbreaks outside of China. And so South Korea made headlines because of its very hardline approach to containing the virus. And it sort of was one of the first countries, aside from China, to, establish its own unique way of responding to the virus, and is what is now known as the South Korean model. So you can really see, I think, the difference between the responses to the virus, particularly between South Korea and the United States, is becoming more stark every day. Okay, the United States numbers are in many ways out of control, while South Korea still has a very kind of tight control over the virus. So originally when we came up with the idea of having this seminar, we were thinking it would be great to speak to someone in Korea about the virus, what's going on in South Korea. But because the impact of the virus is now kind of so huge, bigger than any of us could have imagined, it's not only, affecting public health and economic systems, also livelihoods, but it's also now even shaping the world order and the regional order. So then this webinar idea started to quickly grow bigger, and we thought it'd be wonderful to hear a variety of perspectives of how the pandemic is going to shape South Korea and its position in the region. And so we've got a really esteemed panel of experts. Very grateful to them for taking time out of their schedules. They're all very busy people because they are such great experts. I'll just quickly introduce them now, but I'll introduce them in more length when they come to speak. We have first Director Lee Sung-gyu, who's the Director of Risk Assessment and International Cooperation at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in South Korea's Ministry of Health and Welfare. And then we have Director Daejoong, who's the Director of Development in the Finance Division at the Ministry of Economy and Finance. And then we have Director Liz Griffin, who's the Executive Director of the Australia-Korea Business Council. And following Liz, we'll hear from Dr. Lee Jae-hyun, who's a Senior Fellow in the ASEAN and Oceania Studies Center at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies in South Korea. So I guess one of the few benefits of this pandemic and the shift to online webinars is that we can connect with experts outside of Australia and also interstate. We're really grateful to have you. And each of our experts tonight will be giving a roughly 10-minute presentation. They'll be looking at South Korea's response first from a public health perspective, and then also from an economic perspective. And then because we're broadcasting from Australia, we're also very interested to hear how this will shape the relationship between Australia and Korea, especially the economic relationship. And finally, we'll move on to looking more at how it will affect South Korea's foreign relations and position in the region more broadly. So thank you also to our audience for joining us tonight. You'll be able to send your questions throughout the webinar, and I encourage you to do that. I'll be collecting them. And after the 4 presentations, we're going to move straight on to the Q&A. So I'll be moderating those questions to the panel. It's a good chance, I think, to hear from these experts. So let's get started. The first speaker tonight will be Director Lee Sung-kyu. And as I mentioned before, she's the Director of Risk Assessment and International Cooperation, Ministry of Health and Welfare. And Dr. Lee holds a PhD and MPH in Public Health, along with a BSc in Microbiology and Immunology. She has also held a number of senior roles at the Ministry of Health and Welfare in South Korea, including Director of the Jeju National Quarantine Station. So Director Lee Sung-kyu, could you please get started now? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's really a great honor for me to share our experience and lessons learned on responding to COVID-19 in the Republic of Korea with our Australian friends. First, I will briefly go over the current situation. Yep, so the slide is shared, so I will start my slides. Actually, our current situation is mostly started from the like in the middle of January, as Lauren mentioned previously. In Korea, the peak of the transmission so far was on February 29th, with a record of 909 confirmed cases in a single day. After that, newly added cases have slowly decreased. And since March 12th, the number of daily confirmed cases decreased under 10 till early May. Actually, at that time, we were very confident on the controlling and sustaining, actually suppressing the numbers of the confirmed cases. However, after relaxing to a new routine distancing in daily life, that was our, like going back to our new normal life. The number of cases has been increased due to the cluster transmission continuously occurring in the Seoul metropolitan region and others. As of July 16th, the total number of confirmed cases is 13,612 cases, including 1,966 imported cases, of which 12,396 cases have been discharged from isolation. Actually, today's newly confirmed cases are 61 in total, including 14 new local cases and 47 new imported cases. We had a very large number of new imported cases. Since May 6th, the number of confirmed cases have been increased and more local infections are reported. But this week, and since last week, the trend has been changed. Recently, the number of daily new imported cases is likely to exceed the number of local cases, and sometimes it's like twice more than the local cases. Previously, most imported cases were from Europe and Americas, but recently the imported cases are mainly from Asia, such as the Kazakhstan and some from these Middle East Asias, and also many from the today it was from they were from Iraq and all the countries across the Asia, and as well as we have some imported cases from Americas, Europe, and Africa as well. For last 2 weeks, 45.6% of new cases are imported, and 34.8% and 8.1% are local clusters and contacts of previous cases, respectively. And just 3% of cases has occurred at hospitals, nursing homes, and etc. Now, I'd like to emphasize how important the public health emergency preparedness and response is in the next part. Our efforts for public health emergency preparedness and response has started right after MERS outbreak in 2015 until COVID-19 outbreak. It's about like 4 years. After WHO-Korea Joint Mission on MERS outbreak in 2015, the important recommendations has made. First, early identification and monitoring of all contacts. Second, regular provision of information to the public, including prompt information sharing. And third, strengthening capacity of medical facilities, including training experts for infection control and prevention laboratory. Based on the lessons learned from MERS, KCDC has gone through its reform in its organizational structure and system as well. We have introduced and established the new infrastructure and systems while expanding and reconstructing our existing health system and public health personnel. These are the measures that we have taken different from MERS outbreak in 2015. We have concentrated on risk assessment and risk communication, domestically as well as internationally, and strengthened the full engagement of local and multi-sectoral collaboration. Most of all, early detection through rapid testing and active case finding, as well as contact tracing, has been the key approach during our COVID-19 response. This slide shows the timeline, the progress of the situation and how our government responded to COVID-19. After the cluster cases of unknown pneumonia originated in Wuhan were first reported, we issued alert level 1 and began to prepare for possible importation of COVID-19. The alert level increased to level 2 when the first case was confirmed in Korea, and then to level 3 after more imported cases were confirmed. Secondary transmissions were reported after that. Finally, the alert level was raised to level 4, which is the highest level, and in response to the big clusters in early February, such as Shincheonji in Daegu and Daenam Hospital at Gyeongbu Province. Again, after 2015 MERS, KCDC established the national laboratory system. And we are operating tiered laboratory network from national to the local level that is evenly distributed throughout the country. We also established a specimen transport arrangement within 24 hours for confirmatory testing even before COVID-19. This actually made us to have a very fast and rapid testing, and we could actually have early detection at the very early stage to find out the confirmed cases. Finally, we have established the Emergency Use Authorization System, EUA system, which permits temporary use of unapproved in vitro diagnostic devices during infectious disease outbreak. For COVID-19, actually, we use this system for RT-PCR testing kit. In the beginning of the outbreak, only KCDC was available for lab testing, but later on, we've very quickly expanded to research institutes of public health environment, which are affiliated with local governments. Also, private medical laboratories and hospitals till very early February. Therefore, currently, we have a total of 127 testing institutions available, and the average testing capacity is 20,000 per day, and maximum is 30,000 tests. Actually, this is our special entry procedure. Actually, I just prepared this slide for, especially for our Australian colleagues, because we both of our countries are facing the same problem of the increased number of the imported cases. We have applied this procedure since early February. But actually, the criteria and its guideline details have changed several times depending on the global outbreak situation as well as the imported cases. Currently, at entry screening, all entrants go through fever monitoring and submit health status questionnaire. Upon quarantine investigation, persons with symptoms shall be quarantined temporarily at a facility near airport and receive diagnostic testing. All foreigners on short-term stay with without symptoms also receive diagnostic testing within quarantine station, and then if they are negative, they shall be quarantined at designated facility for 14 days. Korean nationals and foreign nationals on long-term stay without symptoms should receive diagnostic testing within 3 days of entering Korea at a local public health center of jurisdiction of their actual residence, while under 14-day self-quarantine as well. Of course, if tested positive, then all these confirmed cases will be isolated to either hospitals or living and treatment support centers. These are the pictures of the drive-through sample collection and screening clinics. Actually, this was newly invented during our COVID-19 response. These drive-through clinics has contributed to rapid testing. We also, because we could have we could collect these samples very quickly using these drive-through sample collection and screening clinics, as well as we also introduced the walk-through station and other types of the stations for better work. I'd like to point out our contact tracing strategy. They are mainly four steps: investigation, risk assessment, contact classification, and contact management. At the investigation step, we obtain preliminary information through interviewing the patient, primary physician, and family to compensate missing information or confirm the interview outcomes. And then we collect additional information at the stage of risk assessment of the case. Information such as medical records, mobile phone location using GPS, card transaction log, and video footage are collected and investigated in this stage. Actually, we do have a risk assessment for further this investigation. And if we decide we need some more information because these cases sometimes do not have a clear memory about what they've done and who they met and so on. And then if they were just went to the public place, you don't know the old people over there. So in such cases, in the very limited and restricted guideline, we actually collect these additional information. And all these activities should be done only during the outbreak period, not all the usual time and so on. Based on this information, actually, we classify the close and casual contacts and provide guidelines from movement restriction to symptom monitoring. This timeline also shows the various response measures Korea took along with the progress of the outbreak, especially after finding our local transmission, including Shincheonji cluster, which was the largest cluster in Korea. We try to consider and conduct appropriate and effective measures for each phase of the outbreak. In response to the increase in case fatality rate and an increase of the number of cases, as a mitigation strategy, we established a new system to focus more healthcare resources on the severe cases. First, we categorized confirmed cases into 4 categories: mild, moderate, severe, and very severe. Each category receives different treatment and gets admitted to different types of facilities accordingly. This was very important in ensuring sustainability of our healthcare system in Daegu City and Gyeongbuk Province, where we had big clusters. This slide is about the pictures of the living and treatment support centers for mild cases. If these mild cases develop severe symptoms, then they would be right away transferred to hospitals for further treatment. We also further adopted information technology for efficient and creative measures, such as self-health check mobile app, as well as self-quarantine safety and protection app. So we could just have some active monitoring on those contacts or those who are under the monitoring and surveillance. Actually, most importantly, we really appreciate hard work of our healthcare workers and their dedication, and also active public participation, including so many volunteers in community, was another great resource for caring all those self-quarantined contacts as well as vulnerable people. And also, I'd like to emphasize how the public compliance has played a very important role. The public compliance to this social distancing campaign was very high in Korea. I believe that it's due to our effective risk communication throughout our daily briefings by our high officials. During the World Immunization Week, late April, actually we had a very special daily briefing organized for the children with pediatric physicians answering for the questions raised by our children. You can see the pictures on the screen. This was a very good opportunity to provide the effective and right message to our children for better understanding. A child just asked that during this social distancing time, how can we have a birthday party with my friends and so on. Those questions are very witty, but it was very essential for us to think about how we can provide the information to those targeted population. After the peak of transmission of February 29th, we started recommending the public to practice social distancing. Public compliance to this social distancing campaign was generally very high in Korea. On May 6th, we transitioned to a new campaign called new routine distancing in daily life, to advise the public to continue to practice social distancing while pursuing their daily life activities. The campaign advices include staying home if you are sick, keeping a distance of 2 arms length between people, washing hands, coughing and sneezing into your sleeve, ventilating and disinfecting regularly, and keeping in touch with your family and friends while maintaining physical distance. We are trying to help all Koreans integrate these precautions as part of a new daily routine in their lives. During this pandemic time, preparedness and response should be ongoing. Since very initial phase of this disease, our government has considered all kinds of scenarios, and we prepared for always the worst scenario. Currently, we are trying very hard to contain the current situation and suppress the cases by special entry procedure and 3Ts measures like rapid testing, tracing, and treatment. In addition, maintaining the sustainable healthcare system for providing both regular healthcare services and COVID-19 treatment and care services would be the key for the next stage and next surge. We still need to learn more about COVID-19. Till now, we have known that COVID-19 is highly infectious from its early stage and spreads rapidly with cold-like symptoms and so on. New technology is required to enhance our traditional control and response measures as well as to develop novel measures. Sharing the information, the knowledge and practices each other would be the key to overcome the current global pandemic. Thank you very much for for all these inviting me to this event again. And then I think our experience would be one of the practice and examples, but the other countries would actually have a better would take better measures under their the unique situations by just benchmarking our the experiences and measures. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Lee. That was a wonderful presentation, very comprehensive, and it's great to learn about what South Korea is doing. It seems that some of the early aspects of the South Korean model that were borrowed from other countries were the testing, you know, testing in booths, testing in cars. It's very impressive. And one thing I've been surprised about is seeing Korean friends who live in the United States. They've been working there at universities, they even have tenure. And because it's obviously so much safer to be in South Korea right now, they've been leaving their home in the US, returning to South Korea and staying there throughout the pandemic. And it's also interesting to see, you know, they've explained to me the quarantine procedure in South Korea, which seems very interesting, where they even receive a mental health check call, which is something that we should probably adopt here in Australia, I think. But thank you very much, and thanks to those who send through their questions. I will come back later with those questions for Director Lee. Thank you. So our second presentation tonight, we're very honoured to have Director Daejoong, who's Director of Development in the Finance Division at the Ministry of Economy and Finance in South Korea. And he oversees Korea's development finance cooperation policy and also participates in the International Development Projects Committee under the Prime Minister's office, which coordinates bilateral and multilateral cooperation and also humanitarian assistance projects. So Director Lee previously served as Trade Policy Director, in which capacity he managed bilateral trade issues with the United States, including the KORUS Free Trade Agreement, EU, Japan, China, and ASEAN. And he holds a bachelor degree in economics from UC Berkeley and master's degrees from Tufts University, and also the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, also known as KAIST. And he's currently undertaking a PhD at KAIST on the future of the North Korean economy. So thank you very much, Director Daejoong, for joining us, and we look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lauren, and good afternoon and good evening to all of you joining from Australia. It is my great privilege and honor for me to have this opportunity to share about the Korean government's economic measure in against COVID-19. The COVID-19 is struck the world like the massive earthquake. It prolonged the pandemic, has aggravated the economic downturn. The economic crisis arose from the COVID-19 cannot be entitled by the individual country or the economic entity alone. In addition to the economic recovery, countries around the world are struggling together to survive in the course of a turbulence global transformation to post-coronavirus era. In this sense, it is my great privilege to share the Korean economic recovery strategy and also the the pandemic strategy with our colleague from Australia. Today's presentation will be divided into the three parts. First, I will touch upon the current economic status. Following that, I will share on the Korean government's economic measure in response to COVID-19 using the 3 Ps. And the 3 Ps are the protection, preservation, and the preparing. And third part will be on the the really announced in the government's plan on the post-coronavirus, and we call the Korean New Deal. And this was announced 2 days ago by our president. Today, the world is at war against the COVID-19 at two fronts, and both on health quarantine and also the economic front. We are facing unprecedented levels of uncertainty caused by COVID-19. The World Bank has forecasted a 5.2% contraction in the global GDP in year 2020, which is indeed the worst economic record since in the Second World War. Especially the pandemic halted the international travels and also disrupted the global value chain. And this will have a far more the impact and then what we can see in the current numbers and statistic. Korean economy is in no exception from the influence and the turbulence of a global economic downturn. The COVID-19 shock hardly hit domestic demand and also the people's livelihood. And this is especially true for the most vulnerable people and the business. Our consumer sentiment index, which is represented confidence, plummeted in the first quarter and dropped to 18.5% in March. And also the sentiment for the small and the medium business has been also dropped. Korea's export continued to decrease significantly as a result of a border restriction at the border by many of our key trading partners, including the Europe and the US, and also the other trading partner. Next is economic measure taken by the Korean government in response to COVID-19. To tackle the pandemic, our government has provided a comprehensive support of 277 trillion Korean won, which is roughly about $230 billion. And this is account for 14.4% of the GDP. I'd like to explain these measures using the three key words, 3P, protecting, preserving, and preparing. First on the protecting. Protecting refers to the creating the quality job and the safeguarding the vulnerable groups and the business. To help the affected business retain their employees and the job, we have expanded employment retention subsidy for the business that have not lay off their employee. Also, to relieve the nationwide economic damage, the government has provided emergency relief payment to all households. In fact, the consumer confidence index rose in the months of May, showing the sign of a moderate recovery. For small business and SME, the government has provided the liquidity through giving the low rate interest loan and also extending the existing loan. As for the financial market, preemptive and the bold measure has been taken in the bond market, stock market, and also at the short-term money market. Tools such as the bond market stability fund and also the stock market stability fund has been used to to support the financial market. For the preserving, refer to the measure to strengthen the economic resilience by boosting domestic demand, supporting the effective industry, and promoting export. The Korean government has implemented measures such as prepayment, pre-purchasing, and scaling up construction investment as a fiscal stimulus measure. For industries that are severely affected by the COVID-19, including the aviation, travel, shipping, automobile, the government has implemented a range of policy measures such as emergency loan and the special relief measure. To promote the trade, the Korean government has been providing the financial support and also help the business hold on the non-face-to-face consultation and sign the contract with the foreign buyer. Also, we have been supporting the Korean businessmen to enter the foreign country. And when it comes to monetary policy, our central bank, Bank of Korea, has lowered the base rate to 0.5%, which is one of the lowest rate in the history. The last P is preparing for the post-COVID era. the Korean government has been pushing forward the Korean New Deal, which is a nationwide project. The Korean New Deal is divided into the Digital New Deal and the Green New Deal, and its cornerstone is building on the base of the robust social safety net. It aimed to provide the vision of a greener, smarter, and fairer solution to the crisis and the future crisis. The government Korean New Deal is similar to the New Deal in a sense that this is a massive fiscal stimulus aiming at creating the new job, but this is different in terms of it aiming at not on the SOCs and infrastructure building, but is it focusing on the advanced economic structure, create a sustainable new job, and also push forward to digitalization of the future. Next, I will touch upon the details of the Korean New Deal. The first foundation of the Korean New Deal is ensuring the social safety net. This comprises with two focal areas, which are the employment safety net and the human capital investment. The government will tackle the empty or blind spot of social insurance, including the employment insurance, by expanding eligibility and supporting the living costs of those not covered by the employment insurance system. Moreover, we will provide support to those entering the job market and those looking for the career changes. As for the Digital New Deal, the goal is to push the digitalization of all lifestyle, not only the business, but the lifestyle of all people. There are four focal areas which are strengthening data, network, and AI infrastructure. We call DNA. Bringing the digitalization in education, fostering the non-contact industry, and implementing the management system for smart national infrastructure. To be more specific, the government will open public data and utilize them in the manufacturing, medicine, and also the bio industry. We'll also push forward with convergence of a project, combining with the latest 5G network and AI to create the content such as culture, sport, tourism. Furthermore, the government will invest in setting the new digital management system for sectors such as the traffic and the road and the water resource, and including the disaster response system. The other parts of Korean New Deal is a Green New Deal. This is an eco-friendly strategy for changing the Korea from the carbon-reliant economy to the economy using the low levels of carbon. First task is to turn public urban area into the zero energy space. Public building will be remodeled and reconstructed as energy efficiency or the eco-friendly building. For the second task of raising the use of a decentralized low carbon energy, intelligent smart grid system will set up and supply of the clean and renewable energy will be used expanded. In addition, electric vehicle and the hydrocarbon fuel cell car will be increased, and the government will provide relevant subsidy for the business. The final task is to form the ecosystem that support the green industry innovation. In this regard, the smart factory that minimize pollution and the clean plant, which will help reduce the contamination, will be in the future. Finally, I'd like to wrap up my presentation. The world has, after coronavirus, will be remarkably different from what it used to be. And some scholars and experts even call the coronavirus bring the new BC and AD, and BC means the before coronavirus, and AD means after disease. In this crisis, importance of solidarity and cooperation resonate more powerful than ever. In this regard, I hope the Korea and Australia will work closer even together to share the value of experience and lesson to to tackle the great challenge that will be ahead of time in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Lee. That was an excellent presentation, and I certainly learned a lot. Economics is not my strong point, but I've received some really good questions, which I will ask you later. Some of them relate to, is South Korea anticipating a recession? Things like that. I will come back to you later, but thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. Our next speaker tonight, we're delighted to have Liz Griffin, who is the Executive Director of the Australia-Korean Business Council. And she works closely with the chair of this council, the Honourable Simon Crean, to further Australia-Korea trade and investment relationship. So Liz has spent over 2 years working and also studying in South Korea in some of the best universities, Yonsei, Seoul National, and she also speaks great Korean. So in her role at the Australian Business Council, she works with Australian businesses to help them identify opportunities in the Korean market, with a focus on the biotech, financial services, food, agriculture and energy sectors. So it'll be great to hear from Liz about how she thinks this relationship might be shaped by the pandemic. Thank you, Liz.
Thanks, Lauren, and thank you very much for the opportunity to share some of my thoughts about the future of the Australia-Korea economic relationship post-COVID-19. I haven't prepared a PowerPoint presentation, so unfortunately you'll just have to look at my face. I hope that by the end of this presentation you'll agree with me in that the Australia-Korea relationship has a bright future, but that it deserves much more attention than what it is currently receiving. I've structured my presentation into 5 parts. I'll start with a broad overview of the Australia-Korea economic relationship and then move into 4 trends that I see as shaping the future of our economic relationship with Korea. So to start with the overview, Korea is Australia's 4th largest trading partner. That's behind China, Japan, and the US. And it's our 3rd largest export market, again behind China and Japan, but in front of the US. Australia's single largest customer is a Korean customer. It's POSCO, which is one of the world's largest steel makers, and they import a lot of our iron ore and coal. Australia and Korea share a free trade agreement, the CAFTA, which was entered into force in 2014. And the fun fact here is that our chairman, as Lauren mentioned, the Honourable Simon Crean, he was involved in initiating this deal back in 2008 when he was Trade Minister. Australia sent just over 17,000 troops to Korea during the Korean War between 1950 and 1953. And this is still really a well recognised fact by the Koreans. They're still very thankful for our contribution. And every time I go back to Korea and speak to someone of the older generation, one of the first things that they'll say to me once they learn that I'm from Australia is thank you to you and your country for helping us during the Korean War. One of the major reasons that we have such a strong relationship with Korea economically is due to the fact that we have complementary economies. We're both democratic nations. We both have similar views in terms of free trade and human rights issues. And also we're both strategic allies of the US. But although all these positive things that I've just mentioned about the Australia-Korea economic relationship, unfortunately, South Korea still suffers from the image of North Korea. Australian media is largely focused on North Korea and overlooks South Korea's achievements and also its relevance to Australia. I'll now move into the first trend, which links nicely with Mr. Lee's presentation about the Green New Deal that he mentioned in his presentation just before. And the first trend that I'll talk about is that Australia and Korea are both seeking a lower carbon future. Korea has pledged to reduce its carbon emissions to 0 by the year 2050, and hydrogen is a major pillar of its energy policy. It's also the latest buzzword in the Australia-Korea relationship. So hydrogen is an energy source. It can be produced via two pathways. The first is the thermochemical pathway, which uses fossil fuels and emits CO2, which therefore needs to be captured and stored to produce green hydrogen. The second pathway is the electrochemical pathway, which uses renewable energies to split water, H2O, into hydrogen and oxygen again to produce green hydrogen. A major pillar, or one of the major things that Korea needs, however, to achieve its hydrogen strategy is the importation of hydrogen. And this is where Australia comes in. Australia is already well positioned as we are an existing and reliable and well-trusted partner with Korea for its energy needs. And we are working hard to position ourselves well to be a major hydrogen supplier to Korea. Korea is in the process at the moment of establishing 6 pilot projects around the world, and Australia is currently one of the contenders to be a hydrogen base for Korea. But back home, Korea and Australia, we're already achieving some of our hydrogen strategies, and in particular in hydrogen mobility. I'm sure many of you at home have a Hyundai or a Kia car, but it's Hyundai that are really leading the charge in terms of hydrogen cars with their hydrogen fuel cell car called the Nexo. And it was just last month that Australia received its first shipment of these Nexo cars, which will form part of the ACT government's vehicle fleet. The second trend that I'd like to talk about is around Korea's demographic problem. Korea has a very rapidly aging society, coupled with an extremely low birth rate of just 0.98, which is well below the replacement rate of 2. And some estimates predict that if this trend continues, Korea will face natural extinction by the year 2750. And of course, an ageing population combined with a low birth rate means that you've got less people contributing to the pension funds. So Korea, accordingly, the Korean government is currently going through a corporate pension reform and is looking to Australia and often referencing Australia's superannuation system, which has a well-structured, well-developed structure and has undergone many reforms over the past 3 decades. Australia is also very well positioned to help Korea by the way of our fund managers, which have a global reputation, and they stand ready to assist Korean pension funds or insurance companies to help deploy Korean capital globally or in Australia to help them achieve higher rates of return. The next trend that I'll talk about is Korea's appetite to be a global leader in the health and biotechnology space. And as we've heard today, Korea's industry in this health and biotech space has really been thrown into the spotlight, given that they've handled this COVID-19 pandemic extremely well to date. Korea was the first, among the first countries to develop a test kit for COVID-19, and they have over 70 companies working on developing test kits, and these are now being exported to over 100 countries. The Korean government has articulated that it is very keen to become a global leader in the health and biotechnology space, and Korea is already one of the world's largest producers of biopharmaceuticals. Again, similar to the rest of our economic relationship, we have complementary strengths in this sector. Australia has a very well-developed and well-recognised clinical trials ecosystem that the Koreans are very keen to take advantage of, and there have been many partnerships in the last couple of years in this space. But on the other side, Korea is very good at translating and commercialising their world-leading research, which is an area that Australia needs a little bit of help in. So over the next couple of years, the Australia Korea Business Council plans to take quite a big role in this space in helping establish further partnerships in this area. The fourth and final trend that I'd like to talk about is Korea's well-being trend. Some have described Korea's work culture as quite a stressful environment with long work hours. And although this is changing, this has given rise to the well-being trend in Korea, where we're seeing an increasing consciousness by the Koreans in terms of their work-life balance, their health, their food and their overall well-being. And this is creating several opportunities for Australia. For example, when you go to Korea and eat out in Korea, if you do eat a meat dish, Koreans do need to clearly label where that meat comes from. And Australia has a very clean and green reputation in Korea. So I see this as a growing trend. In Korea, there's also a growing demand for fresh produce. And one recent example of a collaboration in this area is between the Victorian government, Austrade and the Australian Table Grapes Association, which has seen Australian table grapes being promoted at some of Korea's high-end retailers such as Hyundai Department Store, Shinsegae and E-Mart. As I mentioned briefly just before, beef is our third largest export to Korea, and again we have a very clean and green reputation for our beef, and this is potentially another emerging opportunity, especially how in recent months we have seen China refuse some of our beef trade, and in these cases we have been able to successfully divert the beef that was originally destined for China into the South Korean market due to our existing relationships in the market. But it is really important to note also when marketing your products to the Korean market, it's very important to understand how they purchase, and e-commerce is taking off in Korea, but also unique to the Korean market is their home shopping channels, and Blackmores has been a successful pioneer in this area. So that concludes the trends that I'd like to talk about, but I will just conclude by remarking that next year, 2021, will be a significant year in the Australia-Korea relationship. Next year marks the 60th anniversary of our diplomatic relations between Australia and Korea, and we're also hoping and expecting a presidential visit from Moon Jae-in, and fingers crossed he brings a business delegation with him. As I've discussed, we're expecting greater opportunities in the economic relationship between Australia and Korea, so there's no better time to be involved in the Australia-Korea relationship. I'll leave my comments there. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Liz. That was great to get an update on what's happening in the bilateral relationship in the economic sphere. So I really appreciate that. And I've got some good questions for you, which I'll get to later. Thank you very much. And our final presenter for tonight, before we move on to the Q&A, is Dr. Lee Jae-hyun. We're very happy to hear from him. He's a senior fellow in the ASEAN and Oceania Studies Center at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies in South Korea. And he's also a member of the Korea Experts Eminent Persons for the ASEAN Regional Forum of the Advisory Group for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in South Korea. Previously, Dr. Lee was a research fellow at the Korean Institute of Southeast Asian Studies and also a visiting professor at the Institute of Foreign Affairs and National Security at the Korean National Diplomatic Academy. So Dr. Lee's research focuses on Southeast Asia, politics and international relations, East Asia, regional cooperation and human security issues. And I think he'll probably touch on a few of those areas of expertise in his presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your kind introduction. I am honored to be a part of this webinar organized by ANU Korea Institute. I was given a topic that what sort of impact that the COVID-19 had on Korean foreign policy, and of course I cannot go through all the aspects of Korean foreign policy in just a few slides, and I will just do kind of a broad description of the impact, and I will survey some new development in Korean foreign policy during the COVID, and hopefully I hope that the new trend will continue in the post-COVID-19 period. As you can see, my title, the post-COVID-19 Korean foreign policy, assess new confidence and proactive Korea. This confidence is kind of a keyword in my presentation, and I believe this COVID-19's impact on Korean foreign policy could be COVID-19 could be a kind of a game changer of Korea foreign policy. Thanks to my co-presenters, I don't have to go through all this graph because the first presenter already explained how well South Korean government and people did to contain the spreading COVID-19 in South Korea. Let me just start with the main point of my presentation. The South Korea, as you already heard, has been quite successful in containing COVID-19, and there was effective government measures and decisive resource mobilization by the government, and public health system was working, and there was elements of voluntarism among the Korean people, health workers, citizens. And I believe we had a kind of right balance between individual right and restriction and limitation put on that right. And the South Korean government, South Korean people in general had kind of confidence in government measure to contain COVID-19. So put this all in one basket, I would say that domestically there was confidence greatly boosted during the COVID-19 crisis. Of course, we were so much plagued by all the government measures and COVID-19 and new confirmed cases, but we are still muddling through in this difficult situation. So my point here is that it had kind of a big impact on Korean foreign policy. That's the main thing about my next slide. Oops. Okay, so the K-quarantine and South Korean foreign policy and diplomacy. In the earliest, this slide is about what has been done by Korean diplomacy, foreign policy, or narrowly by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Of course, I'm not a part of the government, and I don't know what exactly happened in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but this is just the information that I got from the ministry website and other medias. In the early stage of COVID-19 situation, and in the early stage of South Korea successfully containing the COVID-19, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was quite busy with facilitating some assistance to the affected countries. It includes, providing test kits and protection gears and sharing South Korean experience with other countries. And after that, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was slowly moving to more kind of a proactive role in global community and regional and multilateral cooperation. For example, this is one of the greatest achievements by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or Korean diplomacy, that South Korea was quite instrumental in these three initiatives, global efforts. The first, the Global Friends of Solidarity for Global Health Security under United Nations, and support group for global infectious disease response on the WHO, and the last one, group of Friends for Solidarity and Inclusion with Global Citizenship Education on the UNESCO. And the South Korean government was quite instrumental in leading these four groups. And regionally and multilaterally, this year, South Korea is the chair country of what I call MICTA: Mexico, Indonesia, Korea, Turkey, and Australia. These five, so-called middle powers coalition or group for global agenda. And within this MICTA platform, South Korea was kind of pushing cooperation and discussion about how to fight against COVID-19. And there's also the Alliance for Multilateralism. Initially, it was organized by France and Germany. And this year, South Korea was kind of championing the fighting against COVID-19 in this platform. Of course, South Korea is a part of ASEAN Plus 3, and we are very active sharing our experience and our assistance with ASEAN countries. And there's also Regional 7 group. I mean, I'm not sure this is the official title or not, but I call it Regional 7. And this is kind of vice minister level discussion and cooperation among 7 regional countries: Australia, India, Japan, Korea, New Zealand, the United States, and Vietnam. It started in March, early March, and if I'm not wrong, these vice ministers already had 10 rounds of discussion, and they share their experience, and they discussing how to fight COVID-19, what can we do regionally and multilaterally to fight against this pandemic. And also South Korea made some bilateral efforts. We had calls from for assistance from the over 110 countries internationally, and already by June, South Korean government answered 97 such requests. And also South Korean government announced provided 4 million humanitarian assistance to the COVID-affected countries. And the government also announced $100 million for of COVID-19 fund. So after listing all these efforts during the COVID-19 by Korean government, what I get is that the South Korean government is making quite proactive efforts in the region and also globally to fight against COVID-19. This is kind of a sort of a new development. Of course, before South Korean government made some effort to lead this kind of global cooperation in some areas, but not this scale. And so this, I believe this is kind of a new development for South Korean foreign policy. So now I move on to big pictures, changing trend in Korean foreign policy. And the point I made in the previous slide is mostly about confidence, the fourth elements, fourth keywords in this big picture. Let me briefly explain these 4 keywords. First, capacity. It's like the history of Korean foreign policy, as far as I understand. I mean, this is not based on the solid academic analysis, but this is kind of my impression on the Korean foreign policy history. From the 70s, 80s, and even 90s, South Korea made a great economic growth, and we also achieved democratization. And during that time, South Korea's global status was kind of going up, and this all contributed to the greater capacity and ability of South Korea. And also in recent years, there was K-wave, and that added some values to some more to the South Korean soft power. With this growing South Korea capacity, the global community's expectation on South Korea was rising. And there was pressure. Hey, you South Korea, you've grown up so much economically and internationally. So now, from now on, you have to act like a middle power. You have to be more responsible. You have to make more contribution for the global community. And your foreign policy and your other policies should be principled. And in more recent years, there was and still is growing strategic competition between the US and China, and it sort of is shaking regional and global orders. In this context, many countries and many global players asked, what is South Korea's position? Not just between US and China, but what is Korea's answer to the global order and regional order, which was undermined by US-China competition and contest. And the fourth, of course, the keyword is confidence. Now, South Korea got the foreign policy and the diplomacy got more confidence in the experience of responding COVID-19. As I mentioned, the South Korean Minister of Foreign Affairs made some global and regional efforts. And it's got the feeling that we can do something in this region and we can do something globally. And I believe this is kind of a game changer. The South Korea's foreign policy and society in general is kind of breaking an old mode, what I call developing country mentality. Before, South Korea was kind of free riding in global and regional order. And South Korea foreign policy has been quite reactive. And South Korean diplomacy and foreign policy in general put more emphasis on Korea's interest than principle. Now this COVID-19, the fighting against COVID-19 and the confidence we got from the COVID-19 experience, I believe South Korea will expand, South Korea will show the global and regional community more principled foreign policy and more responsibility and more contribution for the global and regional community. This is my last slide, and I should be very brief because I already spent some time. Let me see. I couldn't see the slide. Okay, this is also some items that the Australia and Korea can put their hands together for the regional and global common good. First, regional multilateral framework. Obviously, the fighting against recurring pandemics in the region, like not just this COVID-19, but we had SARS in Southeast Asia, we had swine flu in Southeast Asia and other part of this region. So it is quite urgent to build a multilateral framework to fight against the pandemics, recurring pandemics, and the some regional capable and willing countries like Australia and South Korea can lead these multilateral efforts to fight against pandemics. And this cooperation can expand to other areas of human security threat, like natural disaster in the region and also the environmental issues. The second one, I'm not quite an expert on the economy, but the COVID-19 obviously had impact on not just the national economy, but the regional economy as well. So the regional countries have to make effort to strengthen regional economic order, such as the regional value chain, regional free trade order, and the wider economic order. It's all sort of undermined by the impact of COVID-19. And last but not the least, we are experiencing kind of untapped society. And in this untapped society context, information and communication technology is quite important. And South Korea obviously is fully utilizing this ICT. But there's a catch, the cybersecurity issues. the regional countries, especially Korea and Australia, have to mind and have to focus their effort on this cybersecurity issue. Okay, I will stop here. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Lee. It was, sorry, I just turned my video back on. It was great to get that overview of how the pandemic is shaping South Korea's foreign policy and diplomacy. Very interesting. I'm also interested in this idea that the swift, effective response of South Korea has kind of given South Korea a new confidence in its diplomacy. I'm also wondering if that's partly related to, South Korea's success with its, the Parasite film that was dominating culturally at the time, the pandemic started. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Thank you so much to all our wonderful presenters tonight, and also to our great audience who's been sending through really good questions throughout the whole presentation. I think probably the best way to do it is if I follow the same format of the speakers and try to ask some of the questions, but if somebody else wants to jump in and answer, I would be happy to do that. So the first questions will go to Director Lee Sung-gyu, if you could join us again, and we'll see. Yep, great, you're still there, wonderful. So there were a lot of questions about contact tracing, and I think a lot of people are interested to know, how did South Korea kind of control the virus with no lockdown? Okay, as you know, Australia is now doing a second lockdown in Melbourne, and we have a problem of local transmission happening now. So some of the audience members are wondering, because South Korea also had some local transmission in the nightclubs and churches, how is South Korea managing that local transmission without a lockdown? And also, how is IT technology being used for contact tracing? And is that technology kind of, can it be adapted in other countries? Thank you.
After MERS outbreak, during the MERS outbreak in 2015, we learned that how fast one case can spread to the multiple cases and the clusters. Actually, at the time we had this this cluster and spread it was mostly this hospital acquired transmission, and then because the vulnerable people were mostly infected, we had many deaths at the time as well. So after that experience, actually our government thought that we should really respond from the beginning. It's from this point of entry screening, and then the testing, and all the steps should be followed very fast. And the contact tracing was the key, because as we all know that the Seoul metropolitan area is very crowded area, and then there are many facilities, and then people gather very a lot and easily over there. And then if one case is found, actually recently we found that there are a lot of people related there, and a lot of places are related there, and then how fast the generations go. Because within like 10 days, we could see like 7th generation was over there during the spread. So this was really fast. So in order to find out all these cases, the very rapid and active contact tracing is essential. That was our lesson. So we've put a lot of like resources over there, not only human resources, but also some of the technology and so on. We do not have such apps like the Australia use, the contact tracing app for those the COVID safety app and so on. Actually, we use our IT for just supporting the actual traditional contact tracing. So for gathering more information and then also having some kind of a location tracing and so on. And that is our just IT technology use. But the most important thing to find out these cases and then to suppress the local transmission is the risk communication, the disclosure of information about the information about the case. It's just, but we don't just disclose all the information about the case, but only essential case, which the information of the exposure location and the places, so that if people are aware of that, they are actively participating in this testing and so on. So we usually just repeat. We are repeating to just saying that if you you think that you consider that you are one of the suspects, just visit and our screening center and then get tested and then and so on. So those are really important. And so this contact tracing is one of the key to suppress the local transmission. If you do not just find out all these contacts and then contain them, then one case also may just have like 10 cases tomorrow. We've actually experienced that during our outbreak as well. The second part is about the lockdown. Actually, we didn't have an actual lockdown. When we had this big spike, the cluster in Daejoong and Gyeongbuk area, we really thank to the residents of Daejoong and Gyeongbuk area because they were voluntarily locked down themselves within the city. Actually, they stayed mostly at home and so on, and they really followed the rules. And then we could see how this made a difference. And then all the public as also just saw this could really just have some result on the good outcome when we have voluntary the social distancing and so measures, just following the social distancing measures and so on. And the most important thing is that how effective this social distancing, and then how we what would be the effect of following these measures. We really should inform the public about all these information. And recently, after we are having this routine social distance, routine distancing, actually, we just gave various guidelines in the various settings. So people could know if they go to some place, they followed these rules and so on. All these owners or the managers of the places, they should know what kind of rules they follow in their settings and so on. This information is very important. And also, after we are finding out some clusters in like logistics centers or churches, we after doing our epidemiological investigation, we actually also inform the people that what is a good example of social distancing in these settings. So people know how to behave and how to manage their settings and their lives and their activities. So this information is very important, and then we have to make sure.
I think you've just cut out. Sorry,
Sure that aims. So that was the key measure that we've taken. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, it's really interesting to hear that South Korea's response has been shaped by the 2015 MERS outbreak. And I should mention to the audience that Director Lee was actually involved in managing that outbreak as well. And it's also interesting to hear that, you know, there is this culture of sort of voluntarily locking down, which seems to contrast a lot with the Australian case where, you know, to enforce compliance, people are getting big fines if they don't sort of follow the rules. Okay, great. So the second set of questions will go to Director Daejoong about the financial aspects or economic aspects. So as I mentioned before, one of the questions was, is South Korea expecting to head into a recession? And another question was, has there been a change in foreign investment in South Korea during the pandemic? I'm also wondering how the Sino-US rivalry and many countries deciding to diversify their trade away from those great powers, will that sort of bring opportunities for South Korea? And one other question was, South Korea obviously has a very competitive job market. This was picked up in the movie Parasite. And, you know, the digital deal will obviously, you know, result in more job opportunities, but what will it take to be competitive on the job market after the coronavirus? Oh dear, I think Director Lee has just dropped out for a second. We'll give him a second to come back. Maybe just while we wait, I will read the questions for our third speaker, Liz. Sorry, the questions here. Okay, we'll move on. Do you think that the sort of trade between Australia and South Korea has been impacted by the virus, the pandemic, particularly with the flights being limited, etc.? One very interesting question was, is with the sort of, you know, reconciliation that's been going on between North and South Korea, if, you know, that really picks up and South Korea industries get direct access to North Korean coal, iron ore, rare earth metals, etc., you know, do you think this will affect Australia-South Korea trade? And so I'll just leave those questions for Liz, and back to...
sorry, I have a very bad connection right now.
That's okay.
Can we move on to the next question, and
yeah,
maybe I can come back later?
Sure. So the third question, okay, so back to Liz. And also, do you think the pandemic is sort of going to provide more opportunities or less opportunities for, you know, trade between Australia and South Korea?
Okay, so there's quite a few there. So definitely the COVID-19 has had a huge impact on the trade and investment nature of the Australia-Korea economic relationship. And I think to pick up your other point, travel will be key to that. As you and many of the people on the call will know, relationships are very important when doing business with your Korean clients or counterparts. And so it's really essential that we can be able to travel to meet with our Korean clients and counterparts to be able to do these deals. So until business travel is allowed, I don't see the trade relationship picking up. On the North Korean point, yes, if we do see unification between South Korea and North Korea, there's a huge opportunity here for Australian companies to partner with South Korean companies to go into North Korea and extract some of their resources. North Korea is very rich in natural resources, but unfortunately South Korea has very little, and therefore South Koreans don't have the necessary skills to be able to do that. So partnering with Australian companies would be a very effective way to do that. And companies such as Rio Tinto and BHP, who already have long-standing contracts with companies such as POSCO, should be looking at now and starting to form those relationships.
Great, thank you.
I think I've covered everything.
Yeah, that was wonderful.
All questions, but hopefully.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you. And we're just back to Director Daejoong. So the questions were about a recession, how foreign direct investment will be affected, and also how will the competitive nature of the job market be affected? Will it become more competitive after the pandemic, or will there be more opportunities?
Well, okay, thank you for the question. I think there will be three. First one is the prospect of Korean economy in terms of possible recession. And second one is how the foreign investment will be affected by COVID-19 and also the job market issue. And first one on the recession, I think undoubtedly, and I think this is not just for Korea, around the world, no one is exception from this pandemic, and no one is not affected by the impact of the COVID-19. And this is especially true for Korea. And Korea is making a lot of wealth and the business, out selling the goods and service around the world. And then the more than 50% majority of our wealth coming from the global trade and exchanges. So undoubtedly the Korea will be affected hardest by the pandemic. But according to the recent forecast by the global think tank like OECD and the World Bank, and luckily the Korea is one of the least country that has a fewer impact by the COVID-19, and I think this is really thankful for the health and quarantine the authority able to tackle the COVID-19 as early stage as possible without importing the lockdown. So I think this is important, but still the trade volume has been shrink. And this is not something new for other country, but this is something very new for Korea, hasn't happened since the global financial crisis in 10 years ago and Asian financial crisis in 20 years ago. So this will be affected, and that's why the Korea is our government and the financial sectors and also the monetary authority are working very hard to minimize the impact and directly supporting those hit hard by the COVID-19 and also in providing the additional incentive. And on the foreign direct investment, right now I do not have exact figures and number, but this is also something that's undoubtedly hurt by the COVID-19. But I think we have to look at this in two aspects. And okay, there will be the overall volume and total volume of investment and trade will be shrinking, and this is something that all the international organization has does echo same. But still, the investor will look for the attractive and lucrative market, and after COVID-19, and that's why that our government is looking for that the investment environment and surrounding is more attractive for the foreigner and before. But I'm sure that this is something that we need to work on, and this is also the same for the Australian side. And also for the job market, this is very tricky and hard question. And right now, what we saw is these two things, okay? And irregular workers are hurt more than the regular worker. And those people with the inexperience and those who are entering the job market are hurting is a lot harder than the others. And that's why that we're focusing that some of the industry need to restructuring effort in the future, but this is also risk factor, but also the opportunity factor. And according to the New Deal, national project, we are focusing that there will be the area sector we're going to lose the employment and job, but there will be another sector we need to create and invest and make ready and for the upcoming opportunity, because after the dust are settled after from the pandemic, there will be the major reforms and the fundamental of job market and also the industry as a whole. So I think that we need to make the manpowers and the human resource are capable for the challenges of the coming era of post COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting to hear. And we just have a couple of questions for our final speaker, Dr. Lee Daejoong. The first is, how has the pandemic affected South Korea's perception of China or relationship with China? And also, how has it affected South Korea's new Southern policy? And lastly, will South Korea, do you think, be entering into any sort of new agreements with countries post-pandemic to help them with their recovery? And so do you think South Korea is going to play a role in, you know, maybe pandemic recovery in the region?
Thank you so much. The first two questions by Peter Lee, I guess. Perception on China. Obviously, I'm not part of the government, and my view is just just a view as a scholar. But I'm not representing Korean government at all. And the Korean perception and Korean people's perception on China is already bad since the so-called SARS controversy a few years ago. And the bad perception, negative perception of Korean people toward China has been really recovered since then. And this COVID-19 has further downgraded Chinese image in the eyes of ordinary Korean people. That's what I see when it comes to the Korean perception on China. And second question on the New Southern policy. As you know, at the end of last year, we had Korea's special summit, the third special summit, and the whole government was set to implement the kind of second stage of a New Southern policy this year. But there, as you know, the COVID-19 stopped everything. And because at the moment, the people's movement is limited, so the New Southern policy is not quite well implemented at the moment. But once we storm this pandemic, then we can restart the New Southern policy. The political will is still in the government to push New Southern policy forward. What was the last question? Sorry, I missed.
Oh yeah, do you think South Korea will play a role in, you know, kind of in economic recovery or, you know, just regional recovery?
Yep. I'm not quite sure if South Korea will, but I hope South Korea do some role for the recovery of a regional economy. And I believe South Korea has to do its own part. Well, South Korea's economy is quite big in the region, and we are self-claimed the middle power. And if we claim ourselves as middle power, then we have to act like middle power and has to make due contribution for the regional economy or whatever. That's my answer. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. On that note, Australia, also being a middle power, might be able to join forces with South Korea and do something together for regional recovery. I'd like to thank our wonderful panel tonight. You've all given fantastic presentations and also been very patient with answering questions. And also thank you so much to the audience for posting through those questions. It really enriched the discussion. And unfortunately, in the end, we couldn't answer all the questions, but I'm sure I can also always, we have a record of those questions and hopefully we can get back to people later. It's been wonderful to connect with experts in South Korea and in interstate in Australia. And I think we're all very excited for the day when Australians can freely travel back to South Korea. I know I'm very excited. So I'm sorry we have to end the webinar there. It's been a great discussion. And I'd like to just thank Naomi Oxenham, who's done a wonderful job behind the scenes. She's new to the team at ANU, and without her help, I couldn't have organized the webinar tonight. So thank you so much to everyone who joined in, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you.